right, this is the first class of the spring semester of 2022. Just doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah, it should be 1985. But anyway, looking at the book of Numbers, and as you can see here, from the giving of the law at Sinai till the arrival at the plains of Jordan, it doesn't quite go into the promised land at this point. But of course, we know that doesn't happen until Joshua takes over leadership. The book of Numbers is part of what we call the Pentateuch. The Penta means five, so it's the first 5 books of the Bible, the books that Moses wrote. It's a very important book. It shows a lot of things that happened in the wilderness journey. A lot of the failures, of course, we know a great number of failures by the Israelites as they journeyed through the wilderness that it should not have happened. The Hebrew title of this book is Bimidbar, which means in the wilderness. So a very appropriate name. Remember, the books of the Bible that we have 66 books of the Bible. None of those names that those books are was given to them at the point of the writing. Galatians, it didn't, when Paul sent the book of Galatians out, he didn't say right on top, Galatians. They had no titles. They were letters for Paul, the epistles that Paul wrote. In the Old Testament, Moses wrote things down, and later on they were assigned different names. So we named Numbers in our English Bible. The Hebrew Bible, again, means in the wilderness, which is a very appropriate title. I guess the only good thing is that Numbers is a whole lot easier to say than Bimidbar, so that makes it better for us. The setting here of the Exodus is right after the Passover. You remember, they were told to select the Passover lamb on the first month, the 10th day of the month, and then they were to eat the Passover lamb. They were to take the blood of the lamb and put it on the doorpost of the house. And then when God passed over, a lot of people say the death angel, but that's not in the Bible. When God passed over, if you read the passages, you'll see many, many times it says it was God who passed over. And if they did not have the blood applied, then the firstborn of that house would die. And of course, this motivated Pharaoh to let the people go. And the reason why is for the pharaohs, the firstborn child would take over the rulership after the pharaoh died. And when that pharaoh died, they taught that that pharaoh would become a god. And so of all the gods that Egypt had at that time, they had several thousand gods. It would be tough to keep up with which god it was that you needed at the time, because you have to pray to a certain god. But the most powerful of all the gods would be Pharaoh himself. And so if you could kill the most powerful god, then you must be powerful. Well, and that's exactly what happened in the Egyptians' minds anyway, is that their most powerful god was defeated by Jehovah when the firstborn son died. And so that began the Exodus journey. They got prepared here for the Exodus, first month, the 14th day, and they departed on the 15th month of the first day. And their responsibilities at that time was to go from there into the promised land. It would take them a little while to get there. Now, it wouldn't have taken, if they just went a straight path up there, they'd been there in a very, very short period of time. But God did not want them to go directly up there. They actually spent about 1.5 years in the wilderness before they sent the spies in. And then the spies were sent in, and of course we know what happened. The spies, 10 of the spies said no, 2 said yes. And so God said, because they spent 40 days in the land, that for every day they spent in the land, it'd be 1 year in the wilderness. But God, and I always say, God gave them credit for time served. Okay, the first 1.5 years, 38.5 were added to that to make a total of 40. So it's still 40. It's not 40 from the time that they failed, but 40 from the time that they left Egypt. The tabernacle, very important item in Jewish worship at this time. It was built 1 year after the Exodus. Exodus chapter 40 tells us it was built on the first day of the first month of the second year. So God gave the orders there. And of course, the most holy of the elements would have been the Ark of the Covenant that was within the tabernacle. At one time, you could get a full-sized replica of the Ark that was actually made by the people of Indiana Jones. And so you could actually order one. They would actually sold them, I guess, the template for somebody, and they're selling them. And it was around $1,000, and I couldn't quite go that far, but it was tempting to have that. But the thing about the Ark, and there's so much false teachings about the Ark anyway. It was a very holy item, extremely holy in the Old Testament up until 586 BC. At 586 BC, it was no longer an important article to the Jews, and it's not important today. I get so frustrated with so many preachers today, prophecy preachers or even other preachers, think about that I've heard some say that they have to have the Ark before they can build the tribulation temple. There's nothing in the Bible about that whatsoever. Nothing. They said they have to have ashes of a red heifer, which they did in the Old Testament, have ashes of a red heifer, that they have to have that in order to build the tribulation temple. No, it's not in the Bible. The Jews will do what they want to do in the tribulation period to build the temple in the tribulation or right before the tribulation, either one. We don't know when it will be built. But they're not going to follow God's plan anyway. And on top of that, remember, in Ezekiel, it tells us that right before the final destruction of the temple, that Jeremiah or Ezekiel tells us what happened to the ark, that the Spirit departed from the ark, the presence of God, what we call the Shekinah glory, departed from the ark, went to the temple door, then to the courtyard, then to Mount Sinai, then ascended. If you read that, I think it's chapters 8, 9, 10, 11, 12
Of what?
Of Ezekiel. Tells us that. Now, history tells us, and there's so many, again, false teaching about where the ark is at. If you watch the History Channel to get your theology, you're nuts. Okay, you're just crazy, because I've never seen much what they said to be true. I mean, they got so many weird teachings on that channel. It's not the History Channel; it's a sci-fi channel. Okay. I think the one place that the ark could be, if I had to make a guess where the ark is at today, I would say it from the book of 2nd Maccabees, which 1st and 2nd Maccabees are not books of the Bible. They are in the Catholic Bible, and they actually were in the original 1611 edition of the King James Bible. But that's because of political pressure at that time to have a Bible and include the books from the Catholic Bible into it. So for political reasons, they had to do that. They didn't have the authority just to print a book like we could do today and put whatever we want. The king, even though King James had nothing to do with the actual version of the Bible, other than giving permission for them to do it, they had to include those. Now, and so those, what we call the Apocrypha, are books that the Catholic Bible has. And they have two books, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, that actually are really good history books. Right? They do tell us a lot of the history of Israel, but as any history book, can have errors in it. So we don't know exactly how much is true and how is not. But 2nd Maccabees does tell us the story that Jeremiah, before the destruction of the temple, went in and got the ark and got other items from the temple and took them to Mount Nebo. Actually, 2nd Maccabees says the Mount of Moses, which that would be Mount Nebo, and put them in a cave. And then God closed up the cave so nobody could get them. I think it's possible. I have no problems with that. Do I say it dogmatically? No, but as guesses go, that's the best guess, I think. It'd be the most logical thing to happen. Right? When they built the second temple, they did not have that ark anymore. That ark never came back to the second temple. And so from the second temple, from Zerubbabel's day, what we call Zerubbabel's temple, and the Jews' day is referred to as Herod's temple, the ark, the original ark, did not reside in the temple. Now if it did, it still wouldn't be like it was before, because the presence of God never moved back in. And today, Paul says in 1 Corinthians, what? Know you not that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit? So we have God within us. We don't have to have the ark anyway. And that's why, in the days of Jesus, we'll be looking at Jesus here in the book of Matthew, of his birth and all. In those days, remember, the high priest was Annas and Caiaphas, two high priests that kind of traded off position there. Both were wicked men. And they served many years as high priest, which means on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, they would have had to go into the Holy of Holies. And if they went to the Holy of Holies as wicked men, what would have happened? They'd have died. Well, they didn't die from that. So that meant what?
Wasn't there.
It wasn't there. It didn't matter anymore. They went in and did the rituals, but the presence of God wasn't there anymore. And so that's really important to note. Tabernacle, a very important item, because it was what Israel had up until the days of Solomon. When Solomon finally, I think it was 2 Kings 6. Maybe 1 Kings 6. Let me see. It was 1 Kings 6. It says in the 480th year after the children of Israel came out of the land of Egypt. And so from the time that they left Egypt to the actual building of the temple was 480 years. So we have a good timeline. The Bible actually gives a very good timeline of the history of Israel.
And this was the temple that Solomon built?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. K, what was, it won't come to me now, I know it, but it just won't come to me. What was the portable tabernacle called?
This tabernacle.
Still?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm speaking of, the one that
Well,
they
I
could...
mean, the Old Testament, the tabernacle at all times was portable.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was
Okay,
always
I see.
from the very beginning, because it was to be, they carried it to the wilderness for 39 years.
Yes, okay.
And then when they got to the Promised Land, they put it up at Shiloh. And then, of course, remember with the temple stayed there for a long time, and then David eventually sent for it. And of course, we know the story there of what happened.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So
Yeah,
the
basically-
tabernacle could be moved anywhere?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah.
Okay.
1 month after they left Sinai for the Promised Land, so they stayed in Sinai for that first month there, built the tabernacle, and then at the end, it took them about a month to do that, and then they left Sinai for the Promised Land. So the Bible tells us that on the first day of the second month of the second year. So now they're ready to go into the Promised Land. Right? It would take them a while to get there, because God was preparing Israel to be a nation. They had never been a nation. Nobody living at the time had ever been part of a nation. Right? They had been aliens in a foreign country for a long time, until eventually they became slaves in Egypt. And now they have to come out and they have to learn to govern themselves. They have to learn to take care of themselves as far as judging. Moses was to judge the people, and we know what happened, that it took him from morning to night to judge the people. And Jethro, his father-in-law, recommended that he get 70 people, get others to help him, and God affirmed that and gave him 70 judges to help him judge the people. So all that takes a lot of time. And so now, they're a year or so into it, year and a month into it. So they have about 5 months and they would be in the promised land if they obeyed God. And God, again, set them up for success.
That was in our Sunday school lesson yesterday.
Was
The judges, where they were appointing judges, where Moses told them
Yeah.
to get you judges and officers
Yeah.
to judge the people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was,
Yeah.
that was my Sunday school lesson.
Good, good. 20th day of the second month of the second year, the cloud was lifted from over the tabernacle. Okay, this means what? That when the cloud is lifted up, the children of Israel followed. And so during the wilderness journey, if the cloud did not rise up, they stayed where they were at. When the cloud lifted up, they journeyed to wherever the cloud was at, and then they set up camp again. And there's very specific orders as to set up the camp. You hear people, they don't like formal worship or what have you, that we're too strict or what have you, all this stuff. Imagine what it'd be like to be a Jew living in these days where everything had to be exactly right. The order of the tribes marching had to be right. Where they set the tabernacle up had to be right. Where they set the surrounding, and here on this picture, on how well you can see it on video and all, but you had the tabernacle, and then you had tribe surrounding the tabernacle, and everything had to be organized exactly right. And then we know 6 months after, or now we're talking 4 months after this, when they denied God will allow them to go into the promised land, then the people started dying off. And so all the people that left Egypt would die in the wilderness because of the sin, except for 2 people,
Joshua
Joshua and Caleb. Right? Everybody else died, so the original crew was all dead. Right? Babies born during this time. So how long would that take to travel? People dying at that time. You got to bury the dead. So every day there would be something. Babies born, every day there'd be people dying. And so that hindered their journey, and that's why it ended up taking them a total of 40 years to get there. Well, God demanded 40 years. At the end of the wilderness journey, right prior to going into the promised land, God had Moses write the book of Deuteronomy. So it was given 38 years, 8 months, 10 days after departing Sinai. Which means right there at the very end. Think about Deuteronomy too. And some people have a hard time with this, and I really don't know why they do. But the last chapter of the book of Deuteronomy, if you read it, it says, "And Moses went up from the plains of Moab unto the mount of Nebo, to the top of Pisgah," that's over against Jericho. "And the Lord showed him all the land of Gilead unto Dan, and all of Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah unto the utmost sea." Now that's physically impossible for us to do. Right? You cannot see those places from Mount Nebo. But God showed them to Moses anyway. In the south, in the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees under Zoar. And God then tells him, verse 4, "I've allowed you to go in and see." And then verse 5 says, "So Moses, serving the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord." So, who wrote this chapter? When Jesus references him to Moses, could Moses have written about his own death? God gave it to him. Could he wrote about creation? He wasn't there either.
Right.
So yes, he can write about something that hasn't happened at that point. There's a lot of prophets who prophesied things that didn't happen at that point. How eerie would it be, though, for you to be sat down and God said, okay, I want you to write this down, and you died. Well, you know. But guess what? Moses knew it was going to happen anyway. He knew that he was not allowed to go into the promised land. He had just buried his brother, Aaron, you know, because he wasn't allowed to go in. We don't actually know when Miriam died and all, but, you know, Moses knew that his time was near. He was 120 years old, remember? At
He
that
had
time.
seen God, you know what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
Yeah.
When he gave him the commandments.
Yeah, and it's just like, you know, Abraham did not hesitate to kill his own son.
Right.
God did not allow it to happen, but he didn't hesitate to do it. Why? Because the book of Hebrews says, because he believed that God would raise him from the dead. So Moses, you know, speaking of your death, you know, none of us wants to die right now. You know, how many of you want to go to heaven? Right? We all want to go to heaven. So if I go to my office and bring out the shotgun and say, okay, who wants to go first? We don't want to go first. Right? But that's because God has put within us a desire to live. But we all know, Paul even said, it'd be better for me to die and depart and go with the Lord than to stay here. But he said, for your benefit, I'll stay here. And so, you know, dying is not a sad time for the person dying if they're a believer.
That is so true.
Dying is a sad time for those left behind. And so, you know, and with Moses, I'm sure he understood that. He believed God, trusted God, and God had always kept his word. On the first day of the 5th month of the 40th year, just prior to going again, 11 months before they went in. Now, it would be a sad time for Moses. And it's his brother. To take him up to the mountain, take his son Eleazar up to the mountain, take the garments off of his brother, put the garments on his nephew, and then his brother dies. Again, for Aaron, not a bad deal. For Moses, a sad time. Moses had all of Israel to mourn over the death of the first high priest. The Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in Mount Hor by the coast of the land of Edom, saying, Aaron shall be gathered unto his people, for he shall not enter into the land which I have given unto the children of Israel, because you rebelled against my words at the water of Meribah. Take Aaron and Eleazar his son, bring them to Mount Hor, strip Aaron of his garments, and put them on Eleazar his son, and Aaron shall be gathered unto his people, and shall die there. And Moses did as the Lord commanded, and they went up to Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. And Moses stripped Aaron of his garments, put them upon Eleazar his son, and Aaron died there in the top of the mountain. And Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. When all the congregation saw that Aaron was dead, they mourned for Aaron 30 days, even all the house of Israel. Now it's the 40th year. Again, 6 months left. I guess 7 months. It was the first day of the 6th month. They depart now for Moab. The journey that they took, you know, we know it wasn't a straight journey right into it. They had to go back and forth over the land for 40 years. Moab and Edom, we talked about Edom in the last verse, passage rather, are both on the east side of the Jordan. Because that's the way that they finally came in to the Promised Land, from the east side, when they got up to the Jordan River at Gilgal, is when they entered into the Promised Land. In Moab, Moses here addresses them. Whoops, I'm sorry, I thought I had a work set, didn't I? You know, it's important to note in Deuteronomy chapter 3. In chapter 3, verse 24. When the children of Israel got to the promised land, right there at it, Moses there with them, Moses asked God, he said in 3:24, O Lord God, thou hast begun to show thy servant thy greatness and thy mighty hand, for what God is there in heaven or in earth that can do according to the works and according to thy might. I pray thee, let me go over and see the good land that is beyond Jordan, a goodly mountain in Lebanon. But, he says, the next verse, 26, but the Lord was wroth with me for your sakes, and would not hear me. And the Lord said to me, let it suffice thee, speak no more to me of this matter. Get thee up and talk about Pisgah, lift up thine eyes. Moses, at the last minute, asked God, just let me go in and see it. But he knew he couldn't. And God basically said, yeah, I told you once, don't ask me anymore. You're not going in. Was Moses forgiven?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely forgiven. Of every sin that he ever committed, he was forgiven. Okay? But why couldn't he go in?
There are consequences for our sins.
There are consequences for our sins. And that's what people don't understand. They think they can go out there and do the most horrible thing and just say, I'm sorry, God, and everything goes away. And that's not the way life works. And I tell people this, because it is absolutely true. Every single sin that we commit, no matter what it is, we think it's big, we think it's small, every sin has a consequence. And I think that most of the time, the consequence is not that something bad happens to you. That's not the consequence. The consequence is something good does not happen, because you can't pray anymore until you get that right. If you regard iniquity in your heart, Psalm 6:6 says, that's not what your prayer. And so we know that we have to confess our sin. So when I sin, that there's a barrier between me and God. Not between God and me, but between me and God. I confess my sin, I can go to God. And that's why it's so important. People act like, God didn't forgive me of this or that. Well, God forgives anything. Just because God won't allow you to do something doesn't mean you're not forgiven. It just means there's consequences to our actions. Chapter 34, as I read a while ago. 30 days of mourning for Moses. Actually, finally did get to go into Israel. In Matthew 17, at the Mount of Transfiguration, when Moses and Elijah came down, God then finally allowed him to go in. But that was long after his death. 1,400 years after his death. I won't read all that because I did read a while ago. Part of it anyway. No. Yeah, I did too. Yeah. Talking about the death of Moses at that point. And then we know Joshua and Israel did enter into Canaan on the 10th day of the first month of the 41st year. Actually, 40 years and 10 days they spent in the wilderness. We see that, of course, in the book of Joshua. He rose up early in the morning and moved from Shittim until he came to Jordan. He and all the children of Israel marched there. next week we'll look at the wilderness journey itself.